What you heard from Rapper's Delight was actually sampled and stolen from what others were saying in nightclubs and the streets before that. They picked it up and used it to their benefit, but it's okay. That's all right. We're not going to complain about it because it became what it became, and it was one of the biggest records in hip-hop of all time.
They listening, D.A. Yeah. Everything we saying, D.A.
What's good, everybody? What's up, everybody? We'd like to welcome you to the Q&D.A party. Be good and be good to one another. Get comfortable, sit down and enjoy the show with your lover. Feeling good, doing well, that's the vibe that we bring. From your mic to your mind, from Cali to Maine. Q&D.A, Q&D.A, Q&D.A. Relax and press play.
So when exactly did hip-hop begin, and why exactly is it called hip-hop? We will uncover those mysteries coming up here on this conversation. Q&D.A, our long-form conversations, are available each and every week. Make sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click on this button below me so that you are notified, and become a member. Click on join above me, and members will enjoy exclusive videos like a deep dive on this conversation via yours truly with your raw feed video series on this channel, and a monthly Ask Me Anything. Rocky Bucano's been in the game a long time. This is a guy that was a record producer back in the 80s when hip-hop just began. So he's the perfect guy to take the reins on figuring out how to fund, how to develop, and how to design the first ever museum of hip-hop, and how you can hit it alongside a game to Yankee Stadium as well when it finally pops next year. Rocky, how you doing?
Excellent, and thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Now, you guys have had mile markers along the way of hoping to open at certain dates. Now on the website, it says set to open in 2026. We're pretty confident that is an all-out green light go for next year?
It's all-out green light, and it has to be what it is because there's no further delays. Construction started on the interior fit-out, and once construction starts, there's no stopping. And if it does stop, that's a bad sign. So we're not going to stop. We're going to make sure that this thing gets all the way to the finish line and opens next year.
Now, you guys want to position this as kind of a cousin of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland, which has become an American cultural touchstone. It is where we honor and remember and look at the history of music. And so do we feel like this can be almost like a sister museum to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame?
Well, no disrespect to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but hip hop is the most important and most powerful art form in the entire world. So what we're building is not a Hall of Fame experience. It's really a museum experience. We're preserving and celebrating the history of the culture, and not just the people who created the culture. You know, hip hop has become so much more than just the music. It's dance, it's fashion, it's in politics, it's in everything that you see. It is pop culture, as you said. So what we're creating is a world-class museum right here in the borough that gave birth to hip hop, the Bronx. And we're so excited that this is going to be one of those destinations that the entire world will be able to come and experience what hip hop actually is.
What makes, in your mind, hip hop the most important culture in the world?
Well, think about this. You know, when hip hop first started back in, the early 70s, what the Bronx was like, it was a part of abandonment, burnt out buildings. This group of teenagers who just wanted to have fun in the parks created this new music genre that started from nothing. And back then, when it started to become commercialized and, Sugar Hill, Rapper's Delight, The Big Bang, Curtis Blow, all the early records, music program directors thought this was like a gimmick. They thought it was a fad. They didn't think it was going to last 52 years. And now when you think of everything that you've seen here in media, in commercials, in film, in television programs, when you travel all around the world and you see graffiti all over being celebrated, the Olympics just having breakdancing, during the last Summer Olympics, hip hop is the most influential American export ever to come out of this country. So, to me, there's no debate about it. Hip hop is the most important and most influential art form in the world.
So what you're going to capture with the museum is actually not just the music. You were talking about the entire culture that surrounds, as you said, the graffiti culture of the 80s, b-boxing, b-boys, b-girls, breakdancing, all of that, the streetwear, the fashion, all of it, the art of it, the visual art of it, that's all wrapped up into this museum.
All 100%. It's all about the lifestyle. It's all about everything that hip hop has become. It's not just the music, so, that's what I want to make very clear, that hip hop is so much bigger than just what you hear on Spotify or, used to hear on the radio. It's more than that.
You're going to have a lot of sports fans watching this or listening to this going, oh, how far is that from Yankee Stadium? Because if I go to a Yankee game, can I get over to the museum next season? About where is it in relation to where Yankee Stadium is?
It's a stone throw away from Yankee Stadium. We're 5 blocks south of Yankee Stadium. We sit right on the Harlem River. So we're in a mixed-use development called the Bronx Point, which includes 542 units of 100% affordable housing that sits on top of the museum. Brand new infrastructure, brand new landscaping, a brand new park that sits right next to the museum. So it's one of the best developed projects that I've seen the Bronx get involved in since I've been, part of the Bronx when I was born. So I'm really excited. Yankee Stadium, like I said, is right up the street. Where hip hop started, 1520 Sedgwick Avenue, is 2 miles north of us. So we're in the what I would call the hot zone of hip hop culture.
So it's really interesting when you start talking about the history of hip-hop in the 70s and the abandonment of the Bronx, the inner cities that is happening, white flight across America, but specifically in New York. New York was broke. The Bronx was abandoned by so many people, and there's burnt-out buildings and a lot of urban blight everywhere. And you turn the page 52 years later, and if you drive through the Bronx, if you're going to Yankee Stadium, if you're driving on the Deacon or whatever, there is so many brand new high-rises. There are so many gleaming palaces all over the place. It is hip. It is cool. It is gentrified. It is new. It's pretty remarkable. I mean, for yourself to remember what that looked like in the 70s to where we sit in the 2020s must be mind-blowing in many ways.
I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. So right now, the Bronx is going through a renaissance of sorts. Yes, there is some gentrification happening. You see the high rises, you see the waterfront developments all over the place. But thankfully, what we have built at the Bronx Point is truly what hip hop is all about. It's providing affordable housing to the community. So right on top of the museum, like I said, there's 542 units of 100% affordable. We even have a set aside for formerly homeless people that live inside the apartments above the museum. It's a beautiful thing to look because the museum hasn't opened yet, but the apartments are at 100% capacity, and everyone that lives in there was selected through a lottery process through the city of New York. The city of New York controls the housing component of the project. We are just the cultural anchor that sits on the bottom. So to me, it's a way to recognize that hip hop has always been about supporting and uplifting the people who live in disadvantaged communities.
So tell me about how this vision crystallizes for you. How do you end up as the centerpiece, the focal point to try to make the Hip Hop Museum a reality?
It's a long story. We don't have much time to tell but I started as a teenage DJ in the early 70s. I was a DJ, club promoter, concert promoter. I had my own record company called Strong City Records during the golden era of hip hop. My partner was Jazzy J. He was a superstar in his own right. He worked with Africa Bambaataa and the Soul Sonic Force. He worked with Rick Rubin. He produced that song, It's Yours, with Tila Rock. I don't know if you remember that. He was part of the early Def Jam days. Jazzy is probably one of the most underrated music producers of all time. He and I formed Strong City Records. We put out the Masters of Ceremony, which became a big record, Busy Bee, and a couple other things. I left Strong City. I gave it to Jazzy. I started an independent marketing company called Third Rail. And this was during the time when the rap labels, I mean, the major labels, I should say, were trying to get into the rap business and couldn't figure out how to promote and market these records. So they came to me to help promote and market them. And that's what I did for a couple years. Then I went to work for L.A. Reid and Babyface and Dallas Austin. I managed Teddy Riley. So I've been involved in music for over 50 years. So that's why I'm doing this project.
Well, so I'm glad you said that for the listeners, but I knew your background in music, but how did you become the guy that said, we need a museum, or get entrusted to say, we need a museum, and now you've got to try to execute it? Because it's not just like you say, yeah, we want a museum, you raise a few bucks, you snap your fingers, you start building a museum. It takes a lot of effort, a lot of work. You got to figure out all the logistics of it. So how do you get entrusted with that job?
All right. So here's the quick story. I had got out of the music business for a little while. I was running a small nonprofit here in the South Bronx called the New York Gauchos. It's an AAU boys and girls basketball program. I was the executive director of that program. I put like 600 kids into college on full scholarship through basketball. But I got approached by a couple of real estate developers that wanted to see if the Gauchos wanted to expand to the Kingsbridge Armory, which is one of the world's biggest armories in the entire world. And I was fascinated by it. So I joined this process to try to build out the Gauchos program to the Kingsbridge Armory. Long story short, it didn't work out. That developer didn't have the money to keep in the race for that project. But the city of New York was so fascinated that the Gauchos wanted to expand, they connected me to another developer named Young Woo. And it was through that partnership with Young Woo that the idea for the museum began. Because he came to me and he said, look, I have a chance to win this armory, but the Gauchos by itself is not going to do it. What else could I add to my project that would make it work? And I said, if you got the money to do it, Young, do a museum. What kind of museum? A hip hop museum. And he's like, oh, wow, that's fascinating. So through that relationship with Young Woo, it was the spark that started this whole process about talking about developing a hip hop museum for the Bronx. Young Woo did not prevail in that attempt, which thankfully, thank God he did not, because where we are now at the Bronx Point is much better than the Kingsbridge Armory. So it's been a fascinating journey. I've been working on this project for 16 years. And if I had not started that process with the Gauchos trying to expand the program, I would have never met Young Woo. The conversation about a hip hop museum would have never started. And we probably won't have a hip hop museum if those circumstances didn't fall into place.
It's funny. You don't know why things or how things will come together, but then you look back and go, oh, A plus B equals C there. Those things had to happen to fall into place for something like this. So you said
and then on top of it, after Young Woo lost, and I was in the middle of nowhere. I was like, I had an idea, but I had no money to do this project. I had no vision of how it was going to get to the next level. I had to kind of like figure it out over 16 years. And fortunately, I was able to team up with L&M Development Partners that builds affordable housing. They came to the rescue. And if it wasn't for them, truthfully speaking, there would not be any museum.
You mentioned a specific address as the birthplace of hip hop. And a couple of years ago, I went to a museum exhibition in Manhattan. And it was all this wonderful photography of the birth of hip hop through the 70s and 80s, the evolution of hip hop. And in that display was a little postcard that was the invitation to this party in the Bronx. And it said, this is the first hip hop party. And it just felt like you're kind of stumbling across Magna Carta. Like, how was this held on to? How do we still have this? But tell our audience how we can pinpoint the actual origin date and place of hip hop.
So this is still going to be something that's going to be debated for many, many years. So let me just set the record straight. So that postcard turns out with my curators and the research team that we've put together was not the actual card. That was actually fabricated. So, yes.
Controversy. Okay. Wow.
Controversy.
A fake Bill of Rights. Okay.
A fake Bill of Rights. However, Kool Herc is the godfather of hip hop, but he actually was playing years before that in other parties. So we got documentation that he played even way before that so-called first day that hip hop started on August 11th. He was playing hip hop before that. The reason why people point to August 11th, 1973 is because at that particular party, the combination, not just of what he was playing in terms of music, it was the combination of the dance that connected. And when he was playing those break beats, the B-boys emerged from that party. The actual first breakers emerged from that party. So it's the assemblance and the combination of what Herc was playing in terms of the break beats, but it's also the reaction to the crowd and the style of dance that came out of that started to become what years later would become called hip hop. It wasn't even called hip hop in 1973. It was called the jam, a party, a disco event, all these other terms. It was not called hip hop that time. So it grew into what would be called hip hop years later.
Are we going to attribute the term hip hop to the Sugar Hill Gang and Rapper's Delight?
So that would be called the Big Bang of hip hop, right? When hip hop moved from small community centers, outdoor park jams, nightclubs in the Bronx, Harlem, New York City, that first record is responsible for what later opened the doors for so many other records to follow. So yes, that is a tribute and a celebration of what hip hop has become. But truthfully speaking, it's not the essence of what hip hop started at. The essence is everything that happened before that. The mobile DJs, the artwork on the graffiti writers on the train, spraying all the trains and tagging all the walls. So there's so much more that led to that development. And that's what the museum's purpose is to make sure that the story is accurately told so that people understand the true origins of hip hop.
Do you subscribe to the theory that we call it hip hop because in Rapper's Delight they say the hip, the hop, the hippie, hip hop, you don't stop? Or is it something different than that?
No, it's totally something different than that. So Lovebug Starsky and Keith Cowboy Wiggins, those two are responsible for the terminology hip hop. It didn't. What you heard from Rapper's Delight was actually sampled and stolen from what others were saying in nightclubs in the streets before that. They picked it up and used it to their benefit, but it's okay. That's all right. We're not going to complain about it because it became what it became, and it was one of the biggest records in hip hop of all time.
So the origin of the music in 1973, is it taken from Caribbean music? Is it taken from R&B? Is it taken from soul? What are the threads that lead to 1973 turning it into, as you said, the break beats and this kind of party jam?
Yes, so interesting. I'm going to say this loud and clear. The godfather of soul, James Brown. If it wasn't for James Brown, this culture would not be as energized as it became. It was those drum beats from James Brown, the funky drummer, Give It Up and Turn It Loose, Sex Machine, and I could go on and on. James Brown became the most sampled man in hip hop. And there's a reason for it, because the kids like myself that were playing all kinds of records, that was the music that really inspired us when we were younger. So James Brown, funk, anything that came after James Brown, Parliament Funkadelic, Kool and the Gang, Sly and the Family Stone, all that stuff played a significant role in the development of hip hop music. And
so the break dancing also, what what is that in 1973 or wherever we're going to tab? Okay, this is the moment where breakdancing is created. What's the dance origin? What's the DNA of that dance where it has to be adjusted a little bit, but here's where those moves and that breaking comes from?
Yep. So think about this. The 70s, the biggest thing in music during the 70s is not what we call hip hop. It's disco, Donna Summer, right? The Bee Gees. Everybody in the club is doing the hustle, the kind of dance that you see in Saturday Night Live with John Travolta. But the kids in the South Bronx weren't doing the hustle in these kind of parties where the energy was so electric. They were forming these ciphers, these circles, and it became competitive. They would go down to the ground. It was called go off. It wasn't even called breaking. It was just you were going off to the music that you heard. So long story short, it was the energy from just playing bits and pieces of records, not even the entire record, just repeating loops of small samples, the break parts of records that really caused the excitement and the enthusiasm that these kids in these little community centers and small school auditoriums were really fascinated by. That was what brought everybody together. So in essence, it's a combination of everything, because think about this. When I was a DJ and like Flash and so many other DJs, what made us so popular was that we would go out and search for all kind of records. Manu Dibango, Soma Costa, the incredible bongo rock band, Apache, Babe Ruth, the Mexican. All these records became seminal parts of the early days of hip hop. And those are not just breakbeat records. Those are rock and roll records. Those are jazz records, Bob James. All of these things were put together and became part of the evolution of the music. And long story short, that's why hip hop, I think, is so popular, because it infused all of these different music genres together to become what the culture is known for.
You mentioned Grandmaster Flash, and he is one of those iconic names, a Mount Rushmore kind of guy when it comes to the origin and creation of hip hop. I always wondered, where do the Grandmasters come from? That terminology, because you got Grandmaster Flash, Grandmaster Cass. You have a lot of that kind of terminology. Where does that stem from?
Think of comic books and superheroes, right? So a lot of us were reading comic books and we created all these fancy names. But the first Grandmaster in New York City is a DJ from Brooklyn. His name is Grandmaster Flowers. And he was one of the first black mobile disc jockeys. And he was one of my favorite DJs of all time, by the way. Flowers, his mixing style, he didn't cut and scratch like Flash and them. Flash and them really created and did something very innovative and something different. But his blending and his style of music was unbelievable. So Grandmaster Flowers is what the rest of these Grandmasters got their name from.
Well, that's interesting. I really loved and came of age when jazz became infused with hip hop. And so probably Low End Theory and Tribe Called Quest is the apex of those years. It's probably 91 through 95 or something like that, maybe a little earlier. But those guys that infused jazz into hip hop, I always thought this is true art. I mean, this is artistry, and it had such a different vibe. I'm wondering if there will be something in the museum that kind of captures different chapters and different evolutions of the entire style of hip hop, kind of like that.
That's you want to come work for me? So that's exactly what my design team is working on right now, is what is that opening story? How are we telling the journey, the 50 plus years of hip hop, from where hip hop started and even before where hip hop started to where today's music is and today's art is. So, we are paying very close attention to detail on certain seminal moments. Like you said, Low End Theory, one of the most important records in hip hop's recording. The Fugees, another group. Gangstar, another group. All these groups, Public Enemy, the Beastie Boys, all these groups became seminal parts when hip hop had a turning point where the music shifted and went in a different direction. So our curatorial team is being very cognizant on what those changes, those milestone moments in hip hop history, so that when people come to the museum, they can see the complete evolution of how the art form changed throughout the years.
You know, it strikes me that all those founding fathers of hip hop were really great. I mean, the Curtis Blows and the Grandmaster Flashes and the Sugar Hill Gang and all those guys, KRS-One, but that it kind of took Run DMC to blast it to mainstream. And I guess it was their understanding of the use of the music video and maybe their understanding of how to integrate into mainstream American culture and break out. But does it feel like to you that when Run DMC basically does Walk This Way or so, by the time we get to like 86, that was one of those also those kind of like seminal moments to push it to the forefront of American culture?
Run DMC, the biggest group in hip hop, no question about it. What they did for hip hop transformed hip hop in so many ways. MTV at that time wasn't playing any hip hop. And you were right. Walk This Way, when that got on MTV and that exploded, it took the culture to a whole nother level of awareness. And Run DMC became the Beatles of hip hop. You know, there's no question about their prominence, their contribution to the culture. They remain that, you know, that group that really transformed the commercialization of hip hop. It took it to a new audience. And then the Beastie Boys came right behind them and took it even to another level above that. So long story short, yes, Run DMC, their impact was significant.
The Beastie Boys is interesting because when the Beastie Boys come out with Fight for Your Right to Party, my guess is most people in the hip hop community look down on the Beastie Boys, like they were almost mocking hip hop. But you fast forward 10 years later, I mean, by the time you get to Ill Communication and certainly by the 90s, it feels like the hip hop community is like, oh no, these guys are legit. But what was the initial reaction to three white guys doing hip hop back in the mid 80s?
Yeah, I mean, you're correct. We didn't know what to think of the Beastie Boys. We were like, what are they really trying to do? Are they, like you said, are they mocking us? But once you got to understand MCA and Ad Rock and the crew, they were hip hop fiends. Those guys were monsters. They studied the culture like no one else. And when they came out and they understood what their role and their place in the process, they produced some of the most important records of all time. So, you know, it's like Eminem. You know, when Eminem jumped into the game, people didn't know what Slim Shady was going to be. Was this going to be like some sort of cornball stuff? But it was so interesting because the production of Dr. Dre made you pay attention. But then when you understand Eminem's lyrical skills, you were like, wait a second, this guy is unique. He's got something else to offer. And he became one of hip hop's most prolific selling artists of all time. So listen, I love all of these guys, you know, and women, MC Lyte, I love Queen Latifah, I love Nicki Minaj, I love Cardi B, I love them all. I have to. And, you know, that's my role as the lead person in this museum, is to make sure that all of them get their due, get their respect, get their acknowledgement inside the museum, because that's the purpose of the museum, is to preserve and celebrate all of hip hop.
And I guess kind of like Cooperstown of the Baseball Hall of Fame, you know, you would have my dad go in there and he'd want to see something from Jackie Robinson because he grew up a Brooklyn Dodgers fan. And I'd want to go in there and see something from the 80s or 90s because that was the era that I grew up watching. And then you'd have my son go in there and he'd want to see something that's modern day. And so I guess your challenge also is trying to string all that together for the 55-year-old hip-hop head, the 35-year-old hip hop head and the 10-year-old hip hop, fan, you've got to try to figure out how to find a through line through all that. That can't be easy.
It's not easy, and it's one of the most challenging parts of my job. But, what's going to be the saving grace for us is that we got an amazing design team. Ralph Applebaum Associates, one of the top exhibit design firms in the entire world. I got a great curatorial staff. We got Nas and other people contributing ideas to this project. Henry Chalfant, who was the first photographer to document graffiti culture. So we got some real superstars behind this project that's going to make sure that when this museum opens, it's going to be one of those world-class experiences.
For our audience out there, there is a way to help contribute and to make sure, this hip hop museum is fully funded, because, this is also dependent on private funding as well. So if you go to the website, you guys have the ability for anybody to donate as little as $5, right? To make sure this museum gets done.
I tell everybody, if what we tell people in the world, that there's 100 million plus hip hop fans like you, if everybody contributed $1, just $1 to the museum, this museum would be funded forever. And
that ability sits right now at the website, correct?
Correct. You can go to our website, thhm.org, and click on the donate button, and you can donate as little as $1. Doesn't matter. We appreciate all contributions.
Well, as a kid, even a white kid in the sticks that grew up listening to, in my day, it was it was the guys of the early 90s. It was DOS Effects and, as I mentioned, Low End Theory and Tribe Called Quest. And I loved Busta Rhymes and Leaders of the New School and De La Soul. And then to learn about the guys from the 80s that came before, like Curtis Blow and Grandmaster Flash, et cetera, and then have followed this through to nowadays. I think the Hip Hop Museum is such a cool idea. And the fact that it's going to be so close to Yankee Stadium is so awesome, because that's the perfect day. Hit up the museum and then go to see a Yankee game.
Yeah, 100%.
Is such an awesome idea. And the fact that it's opening next year, because it's got to open next year, is very exciting as well. I love that. So go, as Rocky just said, to the Hip Hop Museum's website, thhm.org, you said, right? And that's where we can donate?
Yes.
And find a way to throw a few bucks that way to make this thing happen. Well, it's a thrill to talk to you, Rocky. Congratulations on all the progress you've already made. I can't wait to see this thing open up, and I promise you we'll bring some listeners through there and have a good old time hanging out, because I'm sure it's going to be awesome.
You got to come to the grand opening, and you're on the list, baby.
I appreciate it, man. Thanks, Rocky. This was awesome.
All right, thank you.
Hey, thanks for watching, everybody. Hopefully you enjoyed that conversation with Rocky. I thought he was phenomenal. For a deep dive on this conversation, make sure you are a member. Join above, or use that URL in the description of this video or the channel, and just pop it into your URL. That way you get my members only series raw feed as I dig into each one of these Q&D.A conversations, including today with Rocky Bucano. Thanks for watching. Make sure you are subscribed, and I will see you next week for the next Q&D.A when we talk mid-90s wrestling and the NWO Hollywood Hogan Revolution. Stick around for that. We'll see you next week. I'm D.A., Damon Amendolara. Thanks for watching, everybody.